Hello and welcome to Kumza Africa Amplified, a podcast reverberating across Africa and beyond. Thank you so much for joining us on this platform. In this special episode, I am joined by one of Africa's outspoken voices, Dr. Miguna Miguna. He is my special guest here on Kumza Africa Amplified. He is a Kenyan-born human rights lawyer and author, as well as a prolific political figure. He will be joining me as we talk about his journey and also getting his unfiltered views on African politics. You don't want to miss it. Thank you so much for joining us. Welcome. All right, Dr. Miguna, thank you so much for joining me here on Kumza Africa Amplified. It's an honor to have you. Thank you so much for joining us.
I appreciate it. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you so much for making the time. The last time I remember you and I, when we spoke, you were making headlines after the airport standoff at the Jomo Kenyatta International Airport. You were arrested, your passport confiscated, and eventually deported back to Canada. But it appears that is water under the bridge now. Dr. Miguna, 7 years later, when you look back at that particular chapter, what comes to mind?
It's not actually water under the bridge because when we are dealing with issues like the one that you're mentioning, the most important aspects of it demands accountability and justice for whatever transgressions occurred. And in this instance, there has neither been accountability nor justice for what happened. And what I mean by that is this. There are individuals, high-ranking individuals working for the government of Kenya at the time, and some of them still holding various significant positions in the current administration, and they were not brought to book. You know, when it was not just a standoff, I think it's a mischaracterization of what actually happened.
Mm-hmm.
As you're aware, I was abducted from my house in Nairobi at night and detained incommunicado in the first instance for 6 days, tortured there, not allowed to see my lawyers, not taken to court, and not given all the basic rights, including the right to see a doctor and things like that. And then eventually, they forced me out of the country. And then despite court orders, which had issued, the courts had issued habeas corpus orders compelling my release and production. They defied that. Then later on, when the courts ordered that they bring me back to the country, they didn't do that. And when I went back to the country, which is what probably you are describing an airport standoff, when I returned to the country, pursuant to court orders on my rights, they detained me there. They had initially not just confiscated the passport, but they destroyed my passport. So then this second time, they detained me in a toilet, refused to release me for 3 days, eventually sedated me, and removed me unconscious to Dubai, which is not my country of residence or permanent or even citizenship. And then I went into exile for 5 years, then returned in 2022 after the current administration was elected into office. They reissued my passport, but the people have not been punished. The people who remember my house was blown up with a bomb. They didn't repair the house. They didn't arrest the people who did this. They didn't arrest the people who abducted me. They have not had an inquiry as to what happened. They have not complied with the court orders up to now. And as I told you, the head of the national police who did all this is now working as President Ruto's security advisor at State House. So when you say water under the bridge, it isn't water under the bridge. Until we have justice, we can't say that. And the problem with us Africans is that we always say that because of lapse of time, we say the thing is in the past, but it isn't.
Yeah.
Just like in South Africa, apartheid is not in the past. Until Africans in South Africa get what it is that they're justified, including their lands.
As you say, Dr. Miguna, your passport was reissued by the current administration. Are you now free to travel to Kenya whenever you like?
Oh, yes, I've traveled to Kenya many times. I've been to Kenya more than 5 times since 2022. So, yes, because there was really no reason why they were stopping me from getting to the country. They feared the impact of the movement we had built. And I believe because of the time that lapsed, they were able to more or less dismantle that movement. And that was the intention. And the current administration is not doing any better.
What is the current state of the national resistance movement at the moment, Dr. Miguna?
If you mean the NRM as a movement as it was then, that was disbanded by the late Raila Odinga. But the national resistance, as it were, for purposes of understanding the political dynamics of the country, is very strong. Because the young people, as you have been observing, have always been protesting consistently. 2024 was very active. They were very active on the streets. 2025 has not been as active as 2024, but they were. Remember, in July, there were huge demonstrations, and a number of young people were shot dead, many abducted and tortured. A few are still not accounted for, and many are facing dubious, trumped-up charges in court. So the resistance is very active in Kenya.
And of course, we're talking about the disbandment of your movement, the national resistance movement that you were actively involved in. But that ordeal that you are talking about must have had a deep personal impact emotionally and even on your family. How did that period, Dr. Miguna, reshape you as a person and as a political figure?
I am not really sure about reshaping because my fundamental ideological, philosophical beliefs were not changed. I've remained exactly how I've always been, ideologically and politically. But in terms of appreciating the contradictions of human beings and the contradictions of political developments, yes, it did. I had, I believe, a significant fresh insight into the fluidity of human behavior, including those that many people believe are quote unquote heroes. And I believe it gave me an insight into what happened to other political figures in Africa. For example, what happened to Patrice Lumumba in Congo in the 1960s, or what happened to Chris Hani after the reconciliation between the ANC, the Communist Party of Kenya, and other resistance movements in South Africa, and the nationalist right-wing racist regime. It gave me an insight as to why Mandela behaved the way he did. and I understood more closely the contradictions that happened in Cuba after the 1959 revolution. So it gave me an insight that I didn't have. I became much more, I would say, I don't want to use the word suspicious, but I became
Yeah.
much more careful with people, no matter how they pretend. I realized that a lot of people that pretend to be progressive are opportunists in sheep clothing. Yeah.
Yeah.
So to that extent, yes.
You did mention the issue regarding the young people, the Gen Z movement that is sweeping across the African continent. Dr. Miguna, these protests that we see, and of course the latest being Madagascar, these have exposed, I suppose, a growing frustration with governance here on the continent and the growing inequality. What do you think this youth-led movements are telling us about the state of democracy in Kenya and Africa as a whole?
Not to pretend to be an expert, I believe my personal opinion is that it largely tells us that the African colonial experiment failed. What you call democracy is actually not democracy. We don't have democracy in virtually all African countries. And I'm not saying that there are democracies elsewhere. I'm simply saying the concept of what a democracy is supposed to be, the content of what democracy is fundamentally challenged in all African countries. But it is not just that. At its core, the institutions and structures of government that were put in place when the colonial administrations purported to leave, mostly in the 1960s and 70s, were not intended to bestow dignity and human rights on the African, because they were set up to extract raw resources and labor from the African. The African was supposed to be a slave in his or her environment, continent, country. And that's what we have seen. The different African heads of states and governments that have come and gone have been there as agents of the colonial system. The colonial system is still deeply rooted. And that is why, more than 60 years after so-called independence, I call it flag independence, because all we have is a flag and a national anthem. But there is nothing else. Land still remains largely in the hands of foreigners and a few elites in each African country. The economy is largely 80% or more in each African country controlled by foreign capital. The raw resources are supposed to be extracted and processed abroad for the benefit of this elite, a tiny 1% elite in each country, and their foreign masters. And so whether you are speaking of South Africa, whether you're speaking of Kenya, whether you speak of Tanzania or Uganda, or you speak of Nigeria, it's the same experience. And each time a few of us decide to transform this system so that it would be beneficial to the average African, the situation is the same throughout the African continent. Because the structures and institutions that were put in place during colonialism are still intact and still serving the same interests that they were meant to serve. And that successive so-called African leaders, they're not really leaders, they're rulers, that they put in place after they quote unquote left, even though they never left, are serving the same masters and interests that they served during colonial times. That is the problem. And that explains why the Gen Zs feel alienated, disconnected, dispossessed, not dignified, and feel this system need to be fought. Unfortunately, in each country where this has happened, the military, which is a stooge of the colonial administration, takes over and transform themselves into civilians, as you saw in, was it Gabon? And then recently you've seen it in Madagascar. And was it also, there is another country where this took place recently.
In
Morocco. But look, even, well, Egypt is the worst example, right? And but it's the same thing. You know, what is happening in Palestine is exactly what is happening in Africa, except at a different level. Because the same agents, the same people that are causing genocide in Palestine are doing the same in Sudan, in Somalia, in the Sahel region. I mean, they're the same. It's the Israeli fascist, Nazi Zionists, and the Americans plus their global interests. They call it a rule-based order, but there's no rule. There is no law. There is no system. I mean, these people don't even recognize the International Criminal Court. These people don't even recognize the International Court of Justice. They sanction the ICC chief prosecutor when he indicts war criminals. So they are even worse than they were during colonialism. At least at that, they were pretending, you know. Now there is no pretense. When you hear Trump speak, it comes undiluted. The fascism is at its worst right now. And everybody's pretending that everything is okay.
Talking about fascism and all the things to do with international structures, Dr. Miguna, many of the frustrations are also tied to Kenya's growing reliance on the International Monetary Fund and the World Bank loans, isn't it? Talking about the Kenya situation, some critics are saying it compromises the fact that those loans are still finding their way into Kenya, into the African continent. That compromises national sovereignty. How would you approach the IMF question, Dr. Miguna, if you were in President Ruto's shoes right now?
You see, we don't need the IMF and the World Bank to begin with. A lot of the so-called loans are actually not loans. They are fake loans. A lot of the so-called loans are processed secretly by these regimes in collaboration with IMF and World Bank executives for purposes of siphoning resources from Africa. The loans never reach our countries. It's usually banked abroad and shared between the big boys and big girls. And when you look at the interest rates pegged on those loans, they are not realistic, because a lot of these loans are not like the loan that you go to the bank for a mortgage as an individual. You know, these bilateral loans or these development loans are supposed to earn very little interest, if any, because that's the purpose for which they were set. They are not supposed to make huge profits, but they, first of all, attach interest rates that are not legitimate. That they don't attach the same interest rates when they give the loans to themselves. Let's say, for example, in the West, those are not the interest rates that are given when loans are taken by government. Okay? But they do this. They do a very different thing with Africa. then the loans don't reach. And when a few billions reach Africa, they don't go towards the projects for which they were issued. And then the repayments are done forever. When you actually track the repayment of the so-called loans to Africa, the payments never end. Even when you see that you have actually paid off the loan, they always renegotiate the loan over and over again and add new interest, to the extent that at this moment, even if you wanted to repay them, you cannot repay them, which means that African countries should get together, bandy themselves together, and tell these people, if they cannot write off these loans, we are not going to pay them off. And you know, there is nothing you can do to a country if they refuse to pay. A lot of people fear that they are going to do. What would they do? What would we? You cannot auction a country. Who will buy it? So you can't say, for example, Kenya is bankrupt and therefore you are going to sell Kenya to Elon Musk. You understand? You are going to put a country in receivership. And that's a lie. Because how come the US, the most indebted country, is not in receivership? Right? The US is the most indebted country. And the person that has loaned the US, the country that has loaned the US trillions of dollars, is China. But you can see the US president still threatening China. So it isn't about economy. It's not about economics. It's about geopolitical bullying, really, and fascism. Because if you look at the political trend and the economic trends of the world, the country with more economic heft as we speak today is China, not the United States of America, not Britain, not France, not Germany. But those are not the countries that are pulling the strings. So in other words, if I was in Ruto's position, I would not be worried about the IMF and the World Bank. I would be worried about what is it that I'm going to do for Kenya to make it truly independent. Independent socially, independent culturally, independent politically, independent economically. What am I going to do to transform and process our raw resources for our benefit so that we sell processed goods? We don't sell raw material. What is it that I'm going to do to transform the knowledge power bank that we have? Africa is a knowledge powerhouse. If you look at African scientists and scholars and researchers that are working abroad for governments abroad, including the US, including their militaries, including in their Silicon Valleys, and you harnessed this for the transformation of the African continent, Africa will be a first world. What is it that you're going to do to reduce unemployment and create gainful quality employment and opportunities for the young people so that they can use their innovation and creativity for the benefit of the continent? These are the things that will actually task my head. It isn't about pleasing the West, making trips 10 times, 100 times abroad to go to useless conferences. What Traore, for example, has been trying to do, I know that a lot of people have been attacking him for absolutely no reason. In Burkina Faso, if we had 15 Traores working together, not in isolated cocoons, for the benefit of the continent, we will solve these problems. And the IMF would not be a problem. Why can't we have a continental bank? Like the African Development Bank should have been at the level of the IMF by this time. But no, because the people that lead it mostly are trained abroad and are agents of the same system that I was talking about and are serving the same masters. So unless we transform the way we think and liberate ourselves mentally, psychologically, ideologically, and philosophically, a lot of these problems will not be solved. A lot of our problems are at here, in the head. That is where the problem should be sorted out. And those who have sorted out that problem in the head are the ones that should be in charge of African countries. Not these charlatans running around calling themselves presidents and prime ministers.
But some observers, Dr. Miguna, are arguing that the Gen Z protests in Kenya were actually hijacked by elements aiming to discredit the movement. Do you share that view?
I do not share that view. Even though I would recognize the fact that there is no pure movement. When you are involved in a struggle, for those who have been in the struggle, you have to accept that, like any other human endeavor, you will have contradictions, individual personal contradictions, and contradictions within the movement. The lack of clarity, ideological clarity, is not itself evidence of a significant problem, because those who study dialectics know that in order to get a synthesis, you must have all these forces, some actually working contra to the progress, so that the resolution becomes better than where we were when we began. So yes, there were a few problems here and there. And of course, the systems that I've described are also not just sitting there waiting to be replaced. So they also send infiltrators and people who are distorting and people who are supposed to sabotage to try to portray the movement other than what it is, in order to discourage people from supporting it. And in the short run, they have managed to do that. But I do not think that on the whole, we can say that the movement was either one, counterproductive, two, not progressive, and three, led by forces other than those that wanted to transform our immediate environment for the benefit of the majority of the people. So I don't accept that criticism.
But you were in support of the calls, Dr. Miguna, of those who were saying that the State House has to be occupied by protesters. Is that not provocative, Dr. Miguna?
If you call that provocative, then even the movement for the liberation of Africa was provocative. Was it not provocative for the ANC and the Communist Party of South Africa, COSATU and the rest, to take up arms and say we are going to resist apartheid? But where did it end? It ended in, at least now, you are able to talk to me from South Africa as an African who is not looking over his shoulders that somebody is going to come and take you away from there, just merely on the basis that you are an African man able to speak freely. So you have to provoke an unjust system. You have to resist and oppose an unjust system. You have to fight it to defeat it. How else do you expect to defeat a repressive system if you don't provoke, you don't antagonize, you don't resist, and you don't fight it? There is an African American, civil rights leader who once said that those who are looking for rain should not complain about thunderstorms, right? So if you fear thunderstorms and you fear floods, then don't ask for rain. You could as well pray for a dry spell so that the whole place becomes a desert. So many of us who are looking for a revolutionary transformation of Africa embrace any movement that is aimed towards doing that.
We're going to talk about the upcoming elections in Kenya in just a moment, but I would like us to talk a little bit about coalition politics because we have spoken extensively about the issues of governance. Coalition politics have become a common feature here on Africa, on Africa's body politic, isn't it? Do you think that they have actually strengthened or weakened governance on the continent?
They have weakened governance in the African continent. And the reason why they have weakened governance is that they are not really truly coalition politics. You see, a true coalition politics requires that if Party A was a socialist party and Party B is also a socialist party, they can work in coalition because the ideological and philosophical beliefs and programs are almost the same. The only difference could be that the leaders may not see eye to eye on everything, or that for strategic reasons they form different parties. But the fact is their fundamental core beliefs are the same. The same reason why the ANC worked with COSATU and the Communist Party, right? And that is why that coalition succeeded in fighting apartheid. So it cannot just be done for the sake of getting or retaining power, because ultimately power should not be the end goal. And in Africa right now, coalition politics is done for power and nothing else. So power is the aim, the end, the goal, the everything. And it doesn't matter if they steal votes. It doesn't matter what kind of atrocities they commit, as long as they can take power and keep it. So I think it should not be coalition building at any price. It should only be done on the basis of principled policies, programs, and ideological beliefs.
Let's move on, Dr. Miguna, because of time. Let's talk about the upcoming elections in Kenya, Dr. Miguna, because there's quite a lot that is being said about the upcoming vote in Kenya. The former Chief Justice, David Maraga, has also entered the race, drawing significant attention. Many view him as a man of integrity and a fresh voice. What is your take on Justice David Maraga's entry into the political arena?
I am not like the average citizen, because I know more than the average citizen. So I will say it is fresh, yes, but fresh in what way? Because I was expecting more than I've actually seen. And I'm one of these people who critique people that come onto the fore and to claiming that they are there to change the country. I have asked and I have not seen Dr. Maraga's ideology. I have asked and not seen Dr. Maraga's philosophy on anything. You know, governance is not just about I'm good, I'm a Christian. Even the the one who was defeated in Malawi, Chakwera, was supposed to be a priest, isn't it?
Yeah.
Where did that take Malawians? So being a man of God, you say you're a man of God, is not what people want. These are secular states. You have to come with significant ideological, philosophical position, well explained and articulated, with a program of what you are going to do, which is different. It would be a slight improvement on Ruto, but because we do not know these things, we cannot say how far he would be able to take us. And that is not very positive. Because the only claim to fame is that he was the Chief Justice when the 2017 presidential election was nullified. That's not good enough. Because the court was not his court. He was the Chief Justice, but there were other judges. And the evidence of rigging was there. That election could be nullified by a street urchin who is reasonable enough to look at the evidence. He's not explained even where he came from. You see, he was not the most qualified person to be Chief Justice when he was appointed. So there was a reason why he was appointed, right? So, and who appointed him? Kibaki. And what is Kibaki's legacy? So I'm interrogating this because if we do not interrogate candidates, and we will have to blame ourselves when they start going south, and we were there and we said nothing. So if David Maraga comes up with a good platform, explains himself, and demonstrates his record, because I can tell you, I grew up in Kenya, I went to school in Kenya. I got into political activism in Kenya. David Maraga is much older than me, and I never heard of him. He was not involved at all for all those years that we had one-party state. What was he doing? How was he surviving within the one-party state? It's almost like saying a person grows up in apartheid South Africa, goes to university, graduates, becomes a judge, but you never heard of him. You never heard him say anything about the apartheid system. You never heard him resist or criticize the injustice happening. What was he doing during all those years? And then until 2017, when he was Chief Justice and led the nullification of the presidential election, what was his views on anything? Where are his judgments that show his jurisprudence? Where he is vis-a-vis the, 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 the terrible, experiences of Kenyans when it comes to police brutality and the rest. As a lawyer, what kind of law did he practice? What kind of clients did he represent? What has he written on anything? Right? Not a group judgment of, let's say, 7 to 9 judges. No, I'm talking of a singular thing that one individual sits alone and drafts. Any article, even a newspaper article, it's critical of the system. You see, this is how we got ourselves in trouble when Moi took power in 1982. Moi was said to be humble, a good Christian, somebody who is very polite and all of that. He became a dictator when he took power. All you need is give someone power to be able to see their true character. So we need to be able to ask David Maraga, what kind of metal are you made from? Show us now before the elections. And I'm not saying that Ruto is good. No, Ruto is terrible. Anybody would do better than him. And David Maraga would certainly do better than Ruto. But it can't just be we are judging from the worst, and anyone who is slightly better is good. We want the best for our country, and that's what I'm going to demand.
That's what you're going to demand. Does that mean that Dr. Miguna's name is going to appear on the ballot for the 2027 elections?
I've not made up my mind, and I will not rule it out. So I told a friend of mine that if Maraga is bumbling the way he is, I may actually enter the race. Because I'm definitely not going to, not this time, I'm not going to support someone just because we had rotten apples in the basket and we choose the one that looks slightly better, but they are all rotten. No, no way. We have to have the best candidates that will have a reasonable prospect of transformation for the benefit of everyone. Because you see, what bothers me is this. So assuming Maraga is good, assuming he's actually what he says he is, he's a man of integrity, he's a good Christian, he believes in the rule of law and constitutionalism. But he doesn't have any idea about how a country can be transformed. He has no philosophy, political philosophy, which is the political philosophy and ideology are the softwares of governance. So if you don't have it, you can't operate the machine. And then he happens to surround himself and appoint people that are not transformative. Then we will have a mess. You understand? Because all he's saying, oh, I will be there for 5 years in order to be a transition president. For how long are we going to have transitions? This is 60 years after the British left in quotes, and you're still talking about transition. We need change now, like yesterday. You cannot talk about transition. You're transiting from what to what, right? And then he says, all we need is to give institutions autonomy to work. How do you give rotten institutions autonomy to work? You have to create fresh ones. We cannot rely on the old, failed institutions. The police system in Kenya, they're murdering Kenyans. So if you give the police autonomy to kill, how is that better than Ruto?
Yeah.
You see what I mean? So we need him to unveil, and it's not just a question of his group or the campaign team explaining what Maraga intends to do. We want to hear it from him. He has to demonstrate that he has the mental capacity to govern.
It is going to be an interesting election, Dr. Miguna. I can't wait. And what I'm looking forward to the most is those fiery debates where you are being featured. I'm looking forward to those debates. But we are having this conversation after the passing away of the former Prime Minister Raila Odinga. You once worked closely with the late former Prime Minister, and you even saw him in as the People's President in 2018. What did that moment represent for you, and how do you reflect on his legacy today?
So you are talking about 2018. That was a momentous occasion. You see, a lot of people have not truly and properly understood what we were trying to do or what actually did happen. Here is a situation where I had long resigned from the Orange Democratic Movement, which he led. I resigned from ODM in 2011. I then ran for elections for the governorship of Nairobi in 2017 as an independent candidate. And ODM had a candidate in Nairobi called Evans Kidero, who was a bad thief and a terrible governor. And I campaigned against Kidero and I debated Kidero. But when the elections took place, I realized that the IBC, the Independent what is the name? IBC, Independent Boundaries Electoral Commission, had completely mismanaged the
Commission.
elections and bungled everything. A lot of the results that were announced did not reflect the actual tally of votes at the polling stations. So basically, they took over the transmission of the results and transmitted things that were not reflective of the results that were announced at the polling stations. Because I was there and I was a candidate. My decision then, and a lot of people at the time, was that we had to stand for electoral justice, that it is important that democracy be seen to be done, not just in terms of the fact that you have had peace at the polling stations, but that the results announced should reflect the will of the people. And that is why I supported Raila Odinga's claim that he had won the elections and the elections had been rigged and he should have been declared the president. So when I administered the oath on Raila Odinga at Uhuru Park on the 30th of January 2018, that was the message we wanted to give to the country, that we should not just accept anything because of so-called peace, stability, which has never served us. That for us to grow and prosper as a country, we need to respect the will of the people. And that electoral justice is important. That if we don't have it, we cannot have all these other things that they are talking about in respect of democracy. Okay? So that was it. I did not join ODM. That is why we decided to form the NRM, so that I didn't have to become a member of ODM. So NRM was basically a resistance movement with people from all parties that opposed what had happened. And I'm very proud of what we did on that day, even though thereafter, the man I administered the oath on went behind my back after I had been exiled, and I think he was part of the reason why I was exiled, and shook hands, quote unquote, with Uhuru Kenyatta. It wasn't done for peace. It wasn't done for stability. It wasn't done for the country. It wasn't done for democracy. It was done for selfish personal interest. It was a transactional deal where you say, you know what? Yes, I have a group of people baying for your blood, trying to remove you from power. They can. But what do you do if I cross over and we strike a deal? What can you give me? So money exchanged hands. And then positions were given to supporters and whatnot. The trappings of power were bestowed, and a promise that you were supposed to support Raila and impose him as president in 2022. So it wasn't good for democracy what happened thereafter. What we did on January 30th, 2018 was good for democracy. But how they choreographed the aftermath is what has taken us back 30 years. That is why you see the demonstrations, the Gen Z rebellion, because people felt betrayed. How do you lose more than 30 people who are sacrificed and murdered by the police and many tortured on the basis that you are doing a deal with the guy who did this? He did not just steal the election, he murdered people. And he created a state of emergency in a country that was very peaceful during elections. And then he made the conditions so bad that nobody else could contest with him, including Raila Odinga, in October 2018. No, October 2017. So he was elected, basically, he was coronated. There was no opponent. The so-called opponents were people he put there and funded to make it look like there was an election. People who did not even win 1% of the vote. So Uhuru won 98%. Have you ever heard that? 98%. That is symptomatic of a dictatorship.
Now, you have always been vocal about issues of accountability, Dr. Miguna. How do you ensure that activism doesn't just expose injustice, but also builds lasting institutions that protect democracy as we wrap up this conversation?
So first of all, you can't build something that is rotten. You need to pull it down. Okay? So we don't have institutions of democracy in Kenya, for example, and the rest of African countries. We don't have that. Yeah. So you need to pull down these rotten institutions that are being shown as basically fig leaves of so-called democracy. They are not democracy. We have to pull down the institutions that have not served Africans and the structures that have not served Africans and build new ones, or transform those that can be transformed so that they can serve Africans. If that is all activism did, I would be happy. I would not want activists to do anything else. Let other people who think that they are better than activists do something else, but I've not seen them. They say, oh, democracy, development, but where is development? Where is democracy? How many millions of people have died in the Congo in the name of development and democracy? How more millions do we have to kill in the Sudan and Southern Sudan, or Somalia, or in Kenya in the name of democracy? This funny thing, by the way, it is this Western idiocy that keep on killing us, and people keep on telling us to embrace it. If a system has not worked for more than 60 years, it's not a system that is worth protecting. We need a new system. Just like the rest of the South finally realized that the American-dominated system is not serving the South. That is why you have the BRICS and whatnot trying to come up with a new currency system instead of the dollar. So why is somebody telling us that these countries that are not functional, they are completely dysfunctional, these borders that were arbitrarily drawn at the Berlin conference are supposed to be protected? I'm not one of these people. I'm saying, no, let's not protect something that has not served us. Let us not eulogize and embrace institutions that have failed. Bringing them down is a patriotic act, is a revolutionary act.
Dr. Miguna, you and I can go on and on, but unfortunately, we are out of time. Any last word that you would like to share with my viewers and listeners?
No, I think we have covered a whole spectrum of issues, and I hope and believe that those viewers who are watching for purposes of proper introspection and objective critique would have benefited. And that's how I would like to end it. Thank you very much for giving me the opportunity.
Thank you so much, Dr. Miguna, for making the time to be here on Kumza Africa Amplified. It has been a pleasure having you. I hope you have also enjoyed the conversation. If you like the conversation, remember to subscribe, like, and share. Until next time, it is goodbye for now. Cheers.